U.S. History, Lesson 3. Today we're going to talk a little about in this lesson the growth of Chesapeake and New England colonies. So we're going to get quite specific on a more and more narrow range of the map today. Now, the first thing we want to look at as we talk about this, just a kind of a general review of the typologies of colonies. You should be aware at this point in time that there were colonies that the English had, but their founding origins, their roots, are significantly different. They come in about 3 separate classifications. One type of colony would be the chartered or a corporate colony. A colony was essentially a private corporation receiving a charter from the king, and it's run as a business venture, a for-profit business enterprise. That's one type of colony the British had in the New World. A second type would be the crown or a royal colony, and this is more along the lines of what the French and Spanish had done over the years, a colony that is property of the state from the beginning. It is not a private enterprise. It's not like a Microsoft or a McDonald's corporation. It's its own. Instead, it is property of the nation state, owned by the nation state, governed and run by the nation state. This is what New Spain was in reference to Spain. It wasn't a subsidiary in any way. It was property of the crown. The third and final type of colony, which we're going to be seeing some of for the first time in today's lesson, would be a proprietorship or a proprietary colony. This is the sort of colony where the king would grant to an individual of note for any particular reason, a large tract of land in the New World, and that person essentially owned that hunk of land and could colonize it and use it and operate it as he saw fit, as the pretty much governing board of that entity. So we're going to move then to the Chesapeake region, which we've talked about Virginia an awful lot already, and you should know an awful lot from your own history already about Virginia, the fact that they moved from being a destabilized colony on the conveyor belt model where immigrants died as quick as they arrived, to a colony that was somewhat profitable based on the cultivation of tobacco, to the issues of their labor problems. With their labor problems, what they had to do is they had to find a way to meet their needs for the economic growth of the colony in this tobacco cultivation. Indentures became the first way to meet this, the indentured servants model, whereby servants came to the New World and were paid for their passage over, stayed 4 to 7 years working for a property owner, and then were free individuals here in the colony. The problem with that method was they still couldn't even meet enough of their needs that way. To further incentivize the labor pool, to further incentivize the growth of the labor pool for this region, the Virginia Company instituted something known as the headright system. With the headright system, any individual, this was a stimulus to try to get people to the New World from the Virginia Company's standpoint. It's a stimulus to get people to the New World. Any existing landowner in Virginia who paid for the passage of an individual over was granted an additional 50 acres of tract of land. So it would both give you additional land to work, but then you would be providing the people through your contracts as a landowner that were going to come and work this land for you. Because the conveyor belt model we're talking about, the mortality rates meant that they were frantic. The Virginia Company and the landowners here were always frantic to get more and more people into the New World because they never had enough to meet their labor needs. Ultimately, indentures, there's a number of limitations to using the indentured servants model. First of which is they could die, and as many people did, in that first 4 to 7 years. Secondly, and even worse, or even more problematic rather, is they could simply escape. They could run away. Now, if you're here in the New World, if you are in, say, the Virginia colony, as a poor white person of limited means, and you flee from your master, that you're indentured servant for, and flee into the hinterlands or elsewhere in Virginia, you've just immersed yourself into a population that's full of poor white people of limited economic means. So if your master or the landlord that you had the contract to sought to hunt you down and find you, it wasn't like looking for a needle in a haystack. It was more like looking for a needle in a stack of needles, because everyone that you had just blended in with all had the same economic circumstances as you, and they just looked like you and were living the same kind of life you were living. Thus, for many reasons, you begin to see Virginia gradually transfer towards slavery. By 1619, the first recorded instances have a Dutch ship bringing a dozen or a dozen and a half slaves to Virginia. African slavery winds up being a solution for a number of reasons. First of all, it's a convenient color coding system based on skin color. Second of all, the people being transported here, they can't just blend into the woodwork of the culture. If I'm a poor Englishman, I'm going to blend into a culture with lots of poor Englishmen in it. Africans brought here could not do that. And also, you had Africans who were brought here who had already been exposed to at least some diseases of the Europeans because of the two continents being connected as they were in many ways. So it seemed like a model that was going to work irrespective of the moral implications of it, is a model that was going to gradually over time replace indentured servants. Not to mention the fact that over time you eventually drain the major excess population from England, which is why it becomes harder and harder to find indentured servants or people that want to do the terms of an indentured contract to come here. So without that, you begin to lose that excess labor pool. People can come and simply come on their own to arrive, or you lose the vast waves of landless people from England coming, which is a spur towards the new labor model of being that propertied slavery model. A big element as well as to why the owners and the elites in the Virginia colony wanted to eliminate indentured servants entirely and move towards the slavery model dealt with Bacon's Rebellion. Now, as we talk about linking events together over time, Bacon's Rebellion is important. Bacon's Rebellion brings out issues of class, race, and land that all come boiling up here in Virginia. The problem with Bacon's Rebellion is you had a large number of landless indentured servants who, for their part, were seeking land. They'd come to the New World hoping that when their contracts expired, or even just immigrants who were coming who were poor, who were not indentured, when their contracts expired, either way, they were going to move into the interior and take tracts of land. The elites, the established elites in the Virginia colony, politically dominated the area, and led by the royal governor William Berkeley. And from their view, tobacco trade and peaceful relations with the Indians and some modest trading of other commodities with the Indians was more important. They already had all the land they needed. After all, they were the elites. They saw no interest in negotiating to antagonize the Indians further to push westward when they already had a social order set up that they thought was a good economic and social model. So what happens is sort of what would have happened in England if you hadn't gotten all the landless people off the land. You've got a large population here that is landless, poor, many of them are armed, and they've got limits on their options economically. Translation, they've got nothing to lose. Under Nathaniel Bacon, a group of these individuals rises up. They rise up and resist colonial authority of Governor Berkeley. They strike out westward and begin massacring Indians and burning their villages to the ground, trying to clean them out. Berkeley declares these people, as the royal governor, declares them in rebellion and says they're all traitors and have to be brought to heel. Nathaniel Bacon and his group respond by marching on Jamestown and burning the royal governor's office to the ground and chasing him out. Ultimately, Bacon will die of dysentery. The rebellion will fall apart without him, without his charismatic leadership. But the ramifications of this, there's two long-standing undercurrents that you'll see in Virginia that will also translate into the American model. That's why this is linkage for what comes later. You're going to see this issue of class differences, haves and have-nots, and also this issue of resentment or resistance to royal authority and control. This might be the first time we see this rear its head up. It most certainly will not be the last. So we're setting in place the first steps on a path that we're going to see things pursued much further on into other lessons that come further down the road.